Giving it a couple more minutes as others come in. Puneet, did you raise a hand or something? What?
Oh, no, I just was answering your question. Anything interesting over the holidays? That's
Oh,
all.
didn't see that. All right. In the chat. Okay.
I think my hello was muted. Hello again.
Yeah, there we go. We got you.
All right.
So what do you call a milestone birthday, Puneet?
50.
50. Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you.
That was a great one.
Welcome to the club.
Thank you.
Did they throw a big celebration for you?
Yeah, a nice surprise celebration. My wife threw for me, and hers is in a couple of weeks, so it was combined, which was nice. And I think one of the other nice parts is kind of connecting it back to Acquira. Is it just validated for me that, yeah, our time is now as AEs, and everyone came up with sort of a word for the year, and mine was reinvention. So that's what I'm really looking forward to this process.
I love it. I love it. That's great. Yeah, I vividly remember my 50th. My wife surprised me with a pretty major blowout that she worked on for over a year. She dug up some old college buddies that I hadn't talked to in a long time, and they showed up, and we had a live band and great food, and so it was fun.
Outstanding.
And my kids still harass me about singing with the band that night. So
I got my 40th coming up here in about 3 weeks.
oh, big
So,
plans.
Happy early birthday in advance.
Yeah, we booked out a private space here at a restaurant in Boston. A bunch of friends coming in from town, out of town and stuff. And then pretty, I like you. My word was the same thing for this month. My wife and I discussed the same thing as reinvention. And so
Nice.
same time we're selling our place, packing everything up, about to make our full-time move down to South Florida. So we're kind of transforming our whole lives here at this stage in our lives.
Wow. Good stuff. That's great. That's
You say
great.
you live in Boston?
Yeah, we split our time right now. We've been kind of bouncing back and forth between Boston and South Florida, but we decided last year to transition full time down to Florida. So that move is happening next month. So we're getting everything ready now. We're knocking our house down, building a new house, and we're literally going to build ourselves an entirely new life this year. So it's gonna be an exciting one. And Acquira, this whole endeavor is a massive part of that. So
Very
Good
good.
luck. I grew up in Boston, so I'm familiar.
I grew up here too. I was raised up here. It's a nice area. We've outgrown it, but it's nice. We're right in the city. There's a lot of nice spots to it. I can't do the winters anymore, man. It's bitterly cold. The other morning I woke up at 2 degrees outside, and I can't do this anymore.
I don't think anyone would enjoy Seattle where we are, rainy and gray 9 months of the year, 8 months of the year, but you get used to it.
My problem is I'm also in commercial development, and unfortunately Boston right now is not a good place. So it's been it's been a struggle the last couple of years. The COVID hit Boston very hard. A lot of people left, and it's just not a good market to be investing in right now, especially with anything real estate wise, commercial real estate. So it's part of our whole exodus strategy as well.
Got it. Well, good. Well, as we have a few others popping in, I noticed on our roster here, we've got some fairly new folk that have joined Acquire in the last 30 to 45 days. And welcome to all of you who have done that. If this by chance is your first AP call, this is our weekly offering. We do try to get together, and it's a little bit free form, but we also typically have a central theme or topic to discuss. Just to bring kind of full circle, when we closed out 2024 at our last call, we had a discussion about the concept of choosing a word for the year rather than perhaps making a whole long list of New Year's resolutions, most of which never get kept. And I'm not judging anybody, but that's the statistical reality as those who do that sort of measure study. It is valuable to think about maybe a central word or phrase that could be sort of your rally cry for the year. And coincidentally, we've had two people voice the idea that they've picked reinvention. Did I hear that right? Was that the right word? Yeah. And Mark, did you have a word? Did you share the last time?
Yeah, I chose meaning for 2025.
That's right. I remember that now. Meaning, well, I'll share mine while we're on that topic, and that's not our topic today, but just to kind of keep that theme alive here. I finally decided that my real word that meant a lot to me was revival. And that's kind of maybe a strange word that's not used a lot anymore. And except for those who might, hear it in their faith life. But for me, it's not so much that I had anything broken or needed to get fixed, but I just want to, I guess part of it is a little bit of a doubling down on what I believe in and where I want to go. And I want to kind of renew and revive my commitment to all of those things. And so that word made sense to me as we move forward into the new year. So I'll share that. And if anybody else has their word that they'd like to share, we can do that. Just chime in or raise your hand. Let me know. Nope. Well, as is usual form here also, before we dive into our topic, I want to ask if anybody's got any updates about their deal search or their process, where they may be in the journey. Anybody have anything they'd like to share with the group?
Yeah, I mean, we got a countersigned LOI on the home renovations business.
Nice. Congratulations.
And I'll share an update on the flooring business that we talked about. Mark, I know you were at the September workshop with me. My husband and I have accepted LOI. We've accepted our lending terms, and we're negotiating a purchase agreement now. So things are moving forward and hope to close before the end of February.
That's awesome.
Very good.
Well, if Katie's the hare, I'm the tortoise. We are
Slow and steady wins the race. Though.
exactly. Yeah, no, we're grinding away. I've just got my my final set of questions from the underwriters on my deal. We slowed down because the business took a hit. So we're in sort of the retrade position, but the seller's motivated. She's ready to go. I'm motivated as well. Still a good deal, but we just need to kind of look at some of the fundamentals on the value, which is why today's topic is going to be super interesting. But no, I think we're looking at maybe the next 30.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations to both of you on that milestone. Katie, remind me, you had a element in your investment thesis about location and jurisdiction and being kind of in upper Kentucky and Tennessee, that kind of area. How's that worked out for you on the flooring company?
It worked out great. So we're based in Louisville, Kentucky, and originally we said, let's cast a wider net, 200 to 300 mile radius. But we started to think more practically about our lifestyle, which involves two little people and their school age girls, daughters, and thought it's much more practical for us to tighten our radius and get a little softer on what kind of business we're looking for. So we tightened the radius to 50 miles, knowing that it might cost us in terms of deal flow and timing. But we got lucky in terms of this business had been listed, had been working with a potential buyer that fell through on the buyer's side. So fortunately, I kind of like that the seller has already gone through half of the process, just because they were very familiar with what our expectations would be, what working with the SBA would be like. So they've been very cooperative and very eager to support this transition. And they're just across the Ohio River. So we're in Louisville, Kentucky, which is on the Kentucky-Indiana border. And they're just a county across from the river in Indiana. So less than 30 miles away, which is great.
Awesome. Well, anybody that lives in a fairly large metropolitan area, 20 or 30 mile commute is not uncommon. And so certainly can be a plus in the lifestyle planning
Yep.
aspects of all of this. So again, congratulations on that. Sounds really good. Yeah. So anybody else have something they want to jump in, share? Okay. Well, so I want to turn to our focus area today, and that is something that we call the Intrinsic Value Calculator. And before I get into any of the real nuts and bolts about that, I thought it'd be helpful to maybe kind of level set the concept of what we're trying to do with that IVC as the acronym we apply to it, Intrinsic Value Calculator. The best analogy I can offer to you is related to any of you who have done a home purchase. You've gone out to the residential real estate market, tried to buy a house, and how does that process work? Well, typically the seller of that house has engaged a realtor to list the house, and part of the price setting is all driven by the amenities that are part of the house and property and structure and its functions, like, how many bedrooms, how many bathrooms, what kind of siding, what kind of roofing, is the garage attached or detached, is it a standalone single family, or is it part of another multifamily complex, like a small condo or small apartment kind of thing. All of those features and functions that make up what the property represents, each has a value in any given market, and you put it all together and you get the final asking price. Now, as a buyer, you go in and you look at all that and you go, okay, I see how you've listed this, but here are things I have discovered in looking at this property. I don't like the fact that you painted all your walls dark blue. I'm going to have to spend some money to repaint the house. That's not going to work for me. So I'm going to deduct that from the asking price. Or there may in fact be a feature that you'll be vocal about saying, I'm willing to pay a little extra because you've got this beautiful outdoor kitchen attached to the property, or whatever. But it's a game of plussing and minusing each of the elements as you break them down, and you get to what your offer is going to be on that property, and then the fun begins, right, with the negotiation. Either the seller tells you to take a total hike, don't even want to talk to you, they don't think your offer's serious, or they're curious. It's close, but maybe they're willing to negotiate. So that becomes part of the next step effort. All of those things that you can think about related to that are true in the acquisition of a small business. You've got a pre-existing value there, at whether it's a legacy of service or product that a company is providing, and it may or may not have various elements of value associated with it. And that's what our intrinsic value calculator tries to do, is to break all of that down, all of those essential moving parts. We try to break that down into impact on the asking price. And we do that through a method of taking the initial asking price and a fair market multiple that we have seen applied to that kind of business. And there's not a perfect science in posting the multiples that we have in our particular calculator, but it's based largely on actual experience and documented proof of other transactions that have gone before, somewhat similar to the idea of reviewing comparables in the residential real estate market to say, what have other, if I'm looking at a 4-bedroom, 3-bath house, what have other 4-bedroom, 3-bath houses in that subdivision, that geography, what have they sold for? And you do kind of an averaging and you get to the number. With the small business, the process is applying a multiple to either the EBITDA or the SDE, and you come up with that potential offer price that you're willing to pay to that seller. So we take those standard multiples that we see for different industry segments, and now we start adjusting them slightly based on the operating elements of the business. And what our intrinsic value calculator that we have in our training material does, there are like 8 categories in the calculator that are to be assessed and evaluated for the impact on the final multiple you might want to use to make your offer. Is everybody with me so far? So the question becomes 2 things. When do you run the calculator and how often do you revisit it? And in our standard methodology, we recommend doing an initial first pass of the calculator before you issue your LOI. So you take whatever data you might be able to accumulate either from the broker, from the seller, or through the classic SIM that is often posted, and you glean data points out of all of that information and you load it into our calculator to see where you might be standing pre-LOI. Now, you are certainly free and welcome to do what you can to ask more questions over and above the data that they're just giving you through the for sale posting information. But in all likelihood, you're not going to be able to do a full due diligence kind of dive into the business before you get the LOI countersigned. So you have to make a sort of a best effort analysis to try to determine, what it's about. We have had a lot of AEs that have had success in talking to the broker about getting introduced to the seller and maybe even driving over and visiting the business and just having a preliminary meet and greet, talk about the business, understand it, take a tour and maybe get a feel for what the staffing looks like, what the facility looks like, if they are relying on certain custom equipment, what does that look like? I know, Katie, I guess in your case, you've got a storefront of sorts associated with the flooring business. What does that look like? All of those things start to give you some idea, kind of like, again, back to residential real estate, kind of taking a walk through the house with the realtor and just, saying, what condition is this in? By the way, I'll tell a side story. I was up in Dallas before the holidays, and there was a house for sale on the street where my youngest son lives. That's who I was visiting. And we were curious. It was on a very interesting, highly sloped property. It was kind of cantilevered into the side of the hill there. And it was just a really interesting house from the outside. And it was for sale. So we made arrangements to go in and take a tour. When we got inside, the house was terrible. From a layout standpoint, every room, and I'm serious when I say this, every room had at least one step you had to go up or down to get into it. Nothing was on the same level. And we went down one hall. There was even a 3-step up bathroom kind of in the side of the wall, so to speak. It looked like it was literally in the side of a hallway. They just ran out of space to have a bathroom and decided that would have been a good space for it. But to get it in there, they had to build 3 extra steps. So it was just an incredibly strange layout. And we talked to the realtor and we said and they were asking almost $800,000 for this property. And it was kind of in far suburban Dallas. And we said, there's no way you're going to get that here. That's just, that's a horrible layout. And it's not even really conducive to a kind of remodeling, because how do you change levels like that in a house when it's all topped up like that? So our intrinsic value assessment of that house was almost zero when we got done with it. We kind of really gave a harsh review back to the realtor. So anyway, not that we were shopping, we were just curious. But my point in all that is you might find some really quirky, strange things in this business once you start talking to the seller and you start learning how they have traditionally chosen to run the business. And you might discover some things that could give you pause. They might not be deal killers, but they're going to give you pause, and they're going to make you think extra about your level of effort to be able to acquire that business, move in, take it over, and make it work properly. So let's go into some of the areas, and let me ask this first. How many of you, I know a couple of you, I think I already know the answer to this, but how many of you have already jumped in and worked with our IVC template that we have in the training? Pretty consistent for everybody. So perhaps what I'll start with is, let me just ask some questions. Were there any specific areas that maybe gave you a little pause, or might have been a little difficult to understand or comprehend on how you might apply it to the particular deal you were looking at? Anybody have a challenge like that along the way? Nothing? Okay. Well, then let me add, I started talking about sort of the timing and sequencing of using the tool, and I said you're going to do a first pass pre-LOI, and the best case you're going to have for using the calculator pre-LOI is just leveraging the information you are given and what is readily available. But we also recommend doing a second pass, and that is after you have gotten a quality of earnings analysis and after you've been able to perform your own due diligence on the business. And both of those elements, the QOE, which is all about the financials of the business, and your own due diligence, which is more of operating details, those should reveal to you some of the aspects of what is going on in the business, what you can look at as bonus points or deficits that you might have to think about. Again, not necessarily deal killers, hopefully, but factors that, if the asking price is kind of rich, once you discover these things, you may want to use them as negotiating points with the seller to say, hey, this is going to be an area that I'm going to have to spend a lot of time and money to take care of. Still interested, want to do it, want to commit, but I'm going to have to adjust my price accordingly. to cover that. You may or may not be able to get those elements rolled in with your seller note. That's often an opportunity to kind of squeeze the seller, if you will, for the things that you see as somewhat lacking in the business. You might get them to carry, basically what you'd be doing is asking them to carry a little more of the risk of your success in taking on the business because you've identified some deficits. So let's talk about some of the key areas where we see these things start to emerge. And one of the first ones that I'm kind of big. Well, I'll tell you what. Let me come back here. I will share my screen for just a moment. Get that opened up. Is everybody seeing this okay?
Yes, come up.
So what we're looking at when we get into this, and this is the first pass, by the way, what we're looking at when we get into the different areas or considerations, you've got demographic data about the location of the business, your population parameters, and all of that is important, obviously, because this is your potential market, the area that you may be serving, and you want some upside opportunity. We have known AEs that have found businesses that they think they love, but when we start looking at the population of the serviceable area around the business, let's say a 25-mile radius for a home service business, it's small. We had one that actually looked at a business where the MSA was only about 50,000 people, and that's not a lot of households for a service business. And if that business is already at the top of that market in terms of penetration, there's not a lot of growth to be seen. Best case, you would be maintaining some kind of status quo and not have much upside to work for. So that, by all account, would probably be more of a negative adjustment. Again, not necessarily saying it's a deal killer, but a scenario like that could really limit your upside. So what you'd be doing is basically buying your own personal lifestyle business if you're not counting on long-term growth. We have a column for fixed asset and inventory value, and in our training, we've got a whole narrative about how to apply adjustments for that. And then we go through the analysis here to come up with some initial adjustments of these numbers. We also look at company culture rating, and this is looking at the staffing and the sort of the traditional mindset or operating principles that they've got. One good indicator of a positive company culture is longevity on the roster. When you ask for a list of employees and they show you people that have tenure at the business, 3 years, 5 years, 8 years, 10 years, you probably have a good workable culture, because when the culture is bad or toxic, you're going to see high churn and turnover in the staffing. So that becomes a kind of a red flag also. You would have to make your own personal judgment about how much you want to work with that culture to change it if it is seeming to be less than you would like it to be. But again, it's a function that's very critical to the future of that business. A lot of these companies also have a seasonality aspect to them. HVAC is an example. You know, depending on the geography you're in, the demand for air conditioning, cooling services is high in the hot months, the hot summer months. I live in Houston. We have a high demand for AC, probably 9 out of 12 months of the year. And that would be substantially different in, say, Chicago or Boston. The flip on that would be the heating systems, your furnaces and boilers and such that serve the heating demand. That whole equation on the seasonality may change depending on your geography, but nonetheless, something to look at. And the big question in seasonality is, does the company have an alternative to provide work opportunities for your staff? You don't want to have techs sitting around. You know, good techs don't like to have idle time, and often their own compensation is based on work performed. So if there's a seasonality lull in the opportunity, you're going to have trouble attracting and retaining good talent, because that seasonality is going to play into their head as well. We move on, we look at customer sales and sales concentration. This is where we get into issues like, who are your primary customers? How much of the business is concentrated just in a small number of customers? This can be particularly true if the business is more commercial rather than residential. You tend to see a swing on the commercial side. The company has gotten aligned with certain general contractors or developers, and again, those might be few and far between depending on where you're located. And even though there may be some stability in how those look, there's high risk that one of those could choose to go away and create a real gap in your revenue flow. So you want to look at customer sales concentration. Key person risk. This is where we get into things like supervisors, managers, sales professionals, any other specialists that might be in the business in a situation where the service is has high licensing requirements. The person that holds the license is a obvious high risk position that has to be addressed properly, and you have to really look at what the requirement is to sustain the business. And then you have to couple that with that individual person and what their likelihood of hanging with you after the acquisition. The recession resilience rating, this is another area to be considered. As you all have probably heard, Acquira tends to lean toward the home services space because categorically home services, specifically residential service, tends to be as close to recession proof as you can get. Not to say it won't be impacted in a recession, but homeowners tend to spend their dollars on replacement or repair if economic times are tight, and they do that rather than just selling the home and moving on to something else. So that creates opportunity to sustain a good business. Another category that we're keen on is management depth rating. If the seller is the one person doing everything, you've got a high risk scenario emerging. And do you really want to get yourself into being that person? If, on the other hand, if you see a distribution of responsibility, typically we see things like there's already a general manager in place apart from and over and above the owner, or maybe there's a field superintendent or some team leaders that are already positioned and operating in those roles. And again, the more sophisticated that structure is, the higher the adjustment you might want to give to the multiple. And then the other thing here too is operation sophistication. And what we mean by this is the presence of procedures, written, documented procedures on how the business operates. We might also evaluate technology and systems that are available. Often we'll see these businesses, they have a high velocity of parts and supplies, but they don't have an inventory management system. So purchasing and usage is kind of on the fly, and that is fraught with opportunity for overspending on supplies or understocking, so that job success is hampered. So having a system in place that properly assesses parts and materials inventories, that's a very good example of some of the things you're going to want to be looking for. If the seller's already invested in all that and put that in place, then that's a bonus for you coming in and taking over. So all of these are areas, the areas in white here on the sheet are generally things we can't do a lot with until we have completed our due diligence and our QOE. We just may not have enough data to really properly assess these things. So we kind of start out with giving them just a median rating of a 2, which has the effect of a 0 adjustment on the multiple. So you just push the initial multiple all the way through the analysis to get to your asking price. But if you ever get an indication of an issue or an opportunity in one of these areas as you're doing your initial pre-LOI analysis, you can certainly make your adjustments, come in and see what the calculator is going to give you for any meaningful change in the offer. Let me kind of stop right there. Let me get back to screen here. Anybody have any thoughts, comments, or questions about what we've covered so far?
I was just going to offer one anecdote, I guess, based on our personal experiences. Even though I know this is intended to be a very quantitative and objective as possible tool, there's still a ton of subjectivity to it. So it really helped us, my husband and I, to, talk to others at Acquira, talk to others that had nothing invested in this flooring business. They couldn't care less whether we moved forward or not, like, to help us really be a little more honest about the rating, because you can't help but, and I will admit I am the guilty party here more so than my husband, of, I fall in love with the business, I fall in love with the opportunity, and I want to make it work, versus like looking at the data, being as objective as possible. So I was just going to share that experiences. Having an accountability partner or partners in this exercise is always helpful.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Katie. Very, very good point, and I like that. So what I'll unpack from what Katie said there is the very true reality that this has to be both subjective and objective. You're being able to get hard data that proves to you, like, for instance, I'll just pick the team seniority and longevity with the business. There is a chance that the data is going to say everybody in this company has been here an average of 7 years. Well, following what I just said, that would be valued as a good thing. But as you start meeting the team and getting to know things, you might just find out that's not necessarily a good thing. The owner perhaps has created a comfort zone for these people. They're not really pushing the envelope. They're not really working hard on the business. There's just this kind of mutual accommodation. It's comfortable, it's nice, it's workable, money is being made, so nobody's been pushed in any particular direction, certainly not for company growth. They've just created a status quo, and that's what they're living with. So that would become a very subjective analysis to try to say, well, wait a minute, okay, 7 years and beyond might be trouble rather than a bonus. So it is very much those kind of issues that emerge while you're doing due diligence that have to be evaluated. But I really appreciate what Katie said, that even when you're going through that process, accumulating these points of consideration, I won't even say data points, but data is clearly part of it, but these points of consideration, you do have to check your own gut of saying, well, am I really looking at this through the right lens? Am I giving it the right weight that it should have relative to the ultimate success of this business? Dana, I see you joined us. Thanks for hopping in. You got any thoughts along that line you'd like to share?
No, I would, I would say, Katie, you're human. And it's really easy to fall in love with what you're trying to do, and because you see all the opportunities, but you really have to read between the lines. You have to assess personalities and situations. I think one of the things we've seen fairly frequently is these sellers are very unique individuals, some good, some not so good. And they can tell you what you want to hear, and you've got to assess whether that really is true or not. And it's always good to sort of assess what they're telling you with a lot of objectivity, because if you don't, you can get yourself into a lot of trouble quickly. In an example is, so-and-so could well be your next general manager, your next operations manager, etc. And everybody wants to believe that, but that may well not be the case at all, to Doug's point. So, but it's you're human, and we all are, and you want to look for it's really a challenge. One of the things I would do, and I've done it before, dig out, sort of fall back on some old accounting tricks. And one is the old T account. This is a derivative of that, where you've got strengths on one side and weaknesses on the other. And you try to just, list as many as you can, and then figure out, how you prioritize those things. And that will help you be objective, I think, or it's helped me in the past. Let me put it that way.
Yeah. And, there's so many of these things that are very much subject to conclusion on first pass. And then as you continue to negotiate with the seller and work through things and discover things, they turn out to be not what you originally thought. And sometimes that's good, and sometimes that's not so good. And on one hand, I can think of a situation. We had a company, an electrical contractor company down in Florida, where the person they thought was going to be general manager potential, they tried them after the transition, and the person was a kind of a dismal failure, to put it mildly. but they looked into the company and discovered there was a person who had been with the company since they walked across the high school stage at graduation. And that equated to about 14 years of experience with the business, but had never stood up to be any kind of leader in the business. He was just a guy that had learned everything the business knew how to do. And when he was asked to become the kind of the general superintendent of all the field teams, he was a little bit reluctant, but he said, I'm willing to try. And he has been a wild success for them. And a couple of contributing factors is, number one, everybody in the company knew him. They liked him. They thought he was a good guy, and they definitely appreciated his technical knowledge. And he was able to lean into the role and really step up, start asserting himself in a positive way. And it was basically a classic diamond in the rough. And you just don't know if you're going to find one of those as you go forward in these things. So back to Katie's original point, it is very much, and I'm not going to deny, it's very much a blend of subjective and objective analysis as you're going through these exercises. And by the way, none of these analyses are perfect. You're going to make some assumptions. You're going to take your best guess. You're going to apply it, make your decisions accordingly. But guess what? That's what entrepreneurship is all about. That is the very definition of entrepreneurship, is assessing some risk, making a decision, and moving forward. So I think with that, I know I'm watching the clock here. We're kind of running up on time. Anybody have any other thoughts or questions you might like to get into? Okay. Well, hearing none, I may offer to give you guys a few minutes back in the day. And I know we're early in the new year, but I want to thank everybody for your continued interest and participation. We'll always be here and available to answer any questions you've got. Feel free to reach out, let us know. But otherwise, thanks for sitting in, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Doug. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Bye.